Joining us now, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, the communications coordinator for the National Security Council. Admiral, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to be with you.
So we're closing in on 1 year. Wall Street Journal has this opinion piece that says, since the catastrophic collapse of Mr. Putin's initial plan, the West's cautious approach has, in its way, actually made the war safer for the Russian president. If the U.S. and NATO had implemented a force majeure in the first days of his failure amid his shock and confusion, Mr. Putin might well have accepted retreat on terms that now glimmer out of reach. How do you assess a year in what we've gotten wrong? Can we right that?
We are going to stay committed to Ukraine going forward. And I think when you see him go to Poland next week in Warsaw, he'll make that case before the entire world and the Polish people that it's important for this solidarity to move forward. And we fully expect that it will. There's no sign at all that NATO's cracking or there's any fissures with our allies and partners. So we're going to move forward in that regard. We have evolved the kinds of capabilities that we have provided Ukraine as the war has evolved. The first few days, as Kyiv was under threat, a lot of attention on things like Javelin anti-tank missiles. As he collapsed his geographic territory to the Donbass in the east, it was all long-range fires, artillery, and these HIMARS. Now air defense is really critical because he's using cruise missiles and Iranian drones to strike civilian infrastructure. So we're going to keep evolving as the war evolves, and we're in lockstep with the Ukrainians, talking to them almost every day about what they need.
And I think the American people are inspired by what they've seen, by their tenacity and their courage. But they also want questions about how this ends and what our commitment is in this measure. Senator J.D. Vance said this: before President Biden spends another taxpayer dollar in Ukraine, he must lay out a clear plan for ending the conflict in a way that advances our national security interests. No more blank checks. It is past time for the president to tell the American people how this comes to an end. How do we define, how does the White House, the president, define this coming to an end?
Well, first of all, there's been no blank checks. Every single item that we have sent into Ukraine has been done in full consultation with the Congress, and we have really enjoyed terrific bipartisan support, bicameral and bipartisan, on Capitol Hill for support for Ukraine, and we fully expect that that will continue. Now, look, it could end today, Shannon, if Mr. Putin would do the right thing and pull his troops out of Ukraine where they don't belong in the first place. Obviously, from the reporting of your correspondents on the ground, that doesn't appear to be in the offing anytime soon. But Mr. Putin shows no sign of being willing to stop this war.
So does that mean we have no sign for where we're ending our commitment to this?
As President Biden has said, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. President Zelensky, as the commander-in-chief, gets to determine if and when he's ready to sit down and negotiate with Mr. Putin and under what circumstances. What we're focused on is making sure that he has all the tools to succeed on the battlefield so that if it comes to a negotiation, or when, that he can succeed at the negotiating table as well. But he has to determine what the timing is right and what the circumstances are.
But the question that's being asked, by increasingly on Capitol Hill, and there's going to be another fight over another round of aid. We're about $200 billion into this so far. There are questions about where the U.S. commitment ends to this. I mean, we had a couple of lawmakers just return and say, Congressman Garamendi was one of them who said, I think this is a year from now going to be still going on, this exact same war.
We don't know. Again, we would like to see it end now. And certainly we want to see it end on terms that are satisfactory to the Ukrainian people and to President Zelensky, so that they remain a whole, free, sovereign, independent state. And independence is an ideal that all Americans can get behind and understand. We'd like it to end soon as possible. My goodness, nobody wants to be sitting here a year from now talking about the second anniversary of war. But as the president has said, Shannon, we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And he means that, as long as it takes.
Okay, let's talk about the situation with China. Secretary Blinken now finally has had this meeting with China's top diplomat over in Munich. Before they had that meeting, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had this bit of caution.
So, a meeting, I suppose, is fine. But if it's just to shake hands and say, gosh, aren't things getting better, and we're going to find ways to cooperate, this is the language of the Biden administration, that would be an enormous mistake.
Okay, so Secretary Blinken says there was no apology from China about the balloon that just flew across the United States. The Chinese come out of this meeting saying this. They say they told us that the U.S. has to face up to and resolve the damage that we've done to China relations with the U.S. By using indiscriminate force to take down that balloon. And also this, if the U.S. insists on taking advantage of the issue, escalating the hype and expanding the situation, China will follow through to the end and the U.S. will bear all the consequences. Is that the kind of meeting that Secretary Pompeo warned about?
No, I don't think so. First of all, we shouldn't be surprised by the Chinese rhetoric coming out of this and the bluster that they are known to put out there in the information space after a discussion like this. Secretary Blinken had a very forthright, very candid exchange with the foreign minister of China and made clear, laid bare our deep concerns about what they did with this spy balloon. And I think we acted accordingly. Believe me, the message was clearly sent to China that this is unacceptable. It was a violation of our airspace. The president acted. We shot it down where we could get the debris, and now we have that debris, and we're going to exploit that debris. We're going to learn more about this system. I think we sent a loud and clear message to China that that's not acceptable. Now, look, it is also still important. Two things can be true at once. That you have lines of communication that are open with China that are important to keep open. Because at times like this, when the tensions are high, you want to be able to avoid miscalculation and misunderstanding. Secretary Blinken was able to deliver that strong message in Munich.
Okay, so we have since shot down 3 other objects. The president came out and said that they're most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutes that are studying things like weather or other things. My understanding, correct us if we're wrong, we're told these missiles used to take out these balloons are over $400,000 each. One of them, apparently we used 2, and the balloon was only maybe worth $12. What do you tell the American people about our ability, our radar, our defenses to differentiate between real threats? Because we can't spend that kind of taxpayer money taking down hobby balloons.
Well, we don't know exactly what these balloons were, and then we've called off now the search in Lake Huron and the one over Alaska, so we may never know completely. But the leading intelligence community assessment is that they were probably for benign purposes, whether it's weather or commercial scientific research. But the president made the best decision he could in the moment with the information that he had and at the advice of his entire military leadership that they couldn't be sure that these weren't being used for some surveillance over sensitive sites. And given the context of the Chinese spy balloon, I think you can understand why it was better to act out of an abundance of caution, which he did. Now, we also had some concerns about civil air traffic. These 3 were flying at altitudes that were much closer to the way transcontinental civilian airlines fly at around 30,000 feet plus. So there was a risk to safety of flight as well.
Okay, I want to ask you, too, the administration has been clear in its denials that there was any U.S. involvement in the Nord Stream pipelines. Seymour Hersh has this long piece out saying he's citing a single anonymous source who talks about what was going on and what he claims led to us being involved in that. He says prior to Putin's invasion of Ukraine back in December, a working group was put together, and he says this. What became clear to the participants, according to the source with direct knowledge of the process, is that Sullivan, meaning Jake Sullivan, intended for the group to come up with a plan for the destruction of the 2 Nord Stream pipelines and that he was delivering on the desires of the president. Hersh points back to the president saying this in February of last year with the German chancellor.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. We will... I promise you we'll be able to do it.
Can you say unequivocally the U.S., no U.S. proxy, no one connected to the U.S. had anything to do? I mean, is the Seymour Hersh complete fabrication, that article?
It's a completely false story. There is no truth to it, Shannon, not a shred of it. It is not true. The United States and no proxies from the United States had anything to do with that, nothing.
If the U.S. were to undertake some mission like that, would the administration have an obligation to inform Congress in advance?
We did not take any such operation, Shannon. And obviously we keep Congress informed appropriately of things, both classified and unclassified, but I can tell you now, regardless of the notification process, there was no U.S. involvement in this. None. Zero. It's completely false.
Admiral, we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.